You may have heard of the observer effect, but perhaps you never realized how closely it is tied to your own life. Science describes it as a quantum phenomenon. The simple act of observing alters what is being observed. But behind this concept, there is a field of mystery not revealed in schoolbooks. Because what physicists discovered when faced with microscopic particles may be telling us something about every choice, every thought, and every direction taken by your consciousness. Perhaps you ask yourself, what does this have to do with me? The answer is more unsettling than it seems. If reality responds to the gaze, then your presence is not passive, but an active agent of transformation. This means that your way of perceiving the world can change the very course of events, not only inside laboratories but within the invisible fabric of everyday life. Today you will hear the version that is almost never told, the observer effect, as a key not only to quantum physics, but to the enigma of human experience itself. Throughout this video, you will see how your gaze creates hidden patterns, how attention reorganizes energy, and how the simple act of being conscious can alter outcomes. And if you stay until the end, you will discover not only what science already suspects, but also how to use this knowledge in your daily life, transforming the way you handle decisions, relationships, and even your own vision of the future. The observer effect ceases to be a laboratory curiosity and becomes a practice, a silent power already at work in you, even without you realizing it. The observer effect gained notoriety at the beginning of the 20th century when physicists began to notice something disconcerting in their experiments. Subatomic particles seemed to behave in different ways depending on the gaze cast upon them. In the famous double-slit experiment, electrons fired toward a barrier with two openings produced results that defied classical logic. Without direct observation, they created a wave pattern, as if traveling both paths at the same time. But when facing a measuring device, the behavior changed. The particles chose a defined path, as if the presence of consciousness altered the natural course of the event. This discovery opened a philosophical abyss, because it was not just a technical detail of the laboratory. If the most fundamental reality that composes all things responds to observation, it means that consciousness is not outside the game, but embedded in the very mechanism that builds reality. The observer effect in this sense is not only about microscopic particles, it is a reminder that the human gaze participates in the cosmic plot. Physicists tried to circumvent this mystery with different interpretations. Some suggested that the act of measuring imposes limits that force the particle to assume a defined form. Others went further, arguing that consciousness is the decisive factor that collapses possibilities into facts. Regardless of the explanation chosen, one truth remained. What seemed solid and independent of human presence proved malleable under attention. This same dynamic can be carried outside the laboratory. Think of the way an event changes depending on how you observe it. A neutral gesture can be interpreted as rejection, affection, or indifference, depending on the gaze that frames it. The event itself does not change, but the interpretation you give it reorganizes the entire experience. At this point, the observer effect begins to approach psychology. It is not raw reality that affects us, but the way we interpret it. However, there is something even deeper. If physics suggests that matter responds to the gaze, perhaps everyday life is also constantly being shaped by the field of attention. It is as if each thought were a lens capable of altering the final form of what manifests. The simple act of noticing a possibility can strengthen its chance of becoming real. The absence of consciousness, on the other hand, tends to let events be lost in the noise of indifference. The curious thing is that science has often tried to restrict the observer effect to a technical, almost mechanical phenomenon within the subatomic world. But spiritual tradition has always claimed that consciousness shapes the world. From ancient writings to meditative practices, there is the notion that whatever the inner gaze focuses on expands and gains strength. It is as if laboratories had merely given new vocabulary to something humanity sensed for millennia. When we unite these two fields, science and spirituality, a much broader picture emerges. The observer effect ceases to be only an intriguing anomaly and becomes a key to understanding the nature of experience. It shows that you are not merely a passenger of reality, but also a co-author. This vision is not just theoretical. It has direct implications for how you conduct your own life. If every act of observation influences, then every choice of focus becomes essential. Constantly paying attention to failures may crystallize that pattern, just as directing your gaze toward possibilities may open paths that previously seemed non-existent. Consciousness works like a field that selects among the many probabilities already present, waiting to become tangible. What is striking is that, even in the face of so much evidence and interpretation, science is still divided over how far the reach of this phenomenon goes. But while the discussion continues, we, as individuals, already experience something analogous daily, situations that change in weight or direction simply by the way they are perceived. This is not a coincidence. It is the same logic operating on another scale. By understanding the observer effect beyond experiments, you begin to realize that your attention is not neutral, but creative. It is what organizes experiences, shapes relationships, and even influences the course of your story. And throughout the next parts, we will expand this perception even further, connecting science, symbolism, and personal practice until it becomes impossible to look at reality in the same way again. What science describes in graphs and formulas can be felt in an intimate and symbolic way. The observer effect, beyond being a quantum phenomenon, can be understood as a living metaphor for the way consciousness and reality interact. Think of a dark, empty stage where countless possibilities lie as invisible actors awaiting their entrance. Nothing happens until the spotlight of attention is turned on. The moment the light of the gaze turns to a specific point, a scene takes shape while all the others remain in shadow. This stage is the very fabric of life. Each day, thousands of possibilities are silently offered, but only those that receive the light of your observation become full events. The observer effect, in this sense, does not speak only of microscopic particles, but of how your gaze functions as a focus of creation. What does not receive attention dissipates like a shadow. What is observed solidifies as experience. This can be perceived in the simplest details. A person who decides to see beauty in an ordinary walk transforms the path into a meaningful landscape. Another, with the same stimuli around them, may experience only haste and discomfort. Nothing has changed in the external environment, but the inner stage was illuminated differently. Life then is not just a fixed scenario, but a set of potentials updated according to the quality of observation. This principle can be applied as symbolic practice. By consciously directing attention, you create fields of reality. The simple act of observing the breath, for example, does not only alter the perception of the body, it changes the rhythm of the heart, reorganizes neural circuits, and even modifies the immune response. The whole body responds to the attention of consciousness, revealing that the observer is not only a witness, but also an architect of biological processes. There are traditions that have always treated this power as a kind of alchemy of the gaze. By fixing upon something, you feed it. It is like watering an invisible seed with the energy of focus. Modern science may call this neuroplasticity, synaptic reorganization, but the essence remains the same. Whatever is observed consistently is strengthened. That is why repeated thought patterns shape entire personalities, and why revisited memories become more vivid than forgotten facts. The observer effect can also be understood as an invitation to care for what you look at, not only in the sense of selecting positive thoughts, but of recognizing the latent power of consciousness in every contact with reality. When observing pain, you may intensify it or transform it, depending on the quality of the gaze. When observing a challenge, you may crystallize it as an insurmountable obstacle or open space for new solutions. From this perspective, observation is not neutral, it is creative. This understanding profoundly alters the way we face choices and experiences. To let attention be dragged by automatisms is to allow realities to solidify without consciousness. To direct the gaze deliberately is to assume the role of co-author of the plot. To bring this concept in an even more concrete way, think of a crystal glass. The glass itself is transparent, but only gains meaning when a liquid is poured into it. Observation works like this invisible liquid. It gives form, color, and density to what was once empty. Each experience receives the substance you decide to pour into it through attention. The same glass may hold wine, water, or poison. The vessel is neutral, the content never is. By applying this metaphor to daily life, it becomes clear that the observer effect is not distant, confined to laboratories, but present in every thought. At every second, you choose where to light your inner spotlight, and this choice shapes the spectacle that unfolds before you. The question that echoes then is not whether the observer effect exists, but how you wish to use it on the stage of your own existence. This perception opens the way to a new responsibility, cultivating the art of observing consciously, because observing is not just seeing. It is summoning reality to present itself, and the more refined this summons is, the subtler and more transformative the world's response becomes. Up to this point, we have spoken of the observer effect as a kind of reflection between the gaze and reality, but there is an even more disturbing layer. What if it were not only the observer shaping the observed, but also the other way around? What if reality itself were constantly shaping the way you look at it? This shift changes everything, because it is not just about directing focus as one who chooses a scene on a stage, but about realizing that the stage is also writing into you. Each experience, each encounter, each silence lived, reconfigures the lens through which consciousness observes. The observer effect in this sense is not unilateral. It is a two-way circuit between what you illuminate and what, by being illuminated, modifies your gaze. Science already intuits this when studying neural plasticity. Each time something is observed, the brain not only records it, but also changes to support that record. In other words, the act of observing not only builds the external experience, but also reshapes the very observer. Consciousness is not a fixed agent, but an entity in constant transformation before what it allows itself to see. This break in the pattern challenges the idea that it is enough to choose where to look, because what you look at already begins to reconfigure the one who looks. It is as if each observation were also a dynamic mirror, returning not only the image of the world, but also a new version of yourself. The observer effect then reveals itself as a cycle of mutual creation, where reality and consciousness build one another without hierarchy. This perception may be uncomfortable because it takes us away from the illusion of absolute control. However, it is precisely there that depth lies. If the world also observes us, it means we are in constant dialogue with something greater. It is not about dominating reality with the gaze, but about learning to dance with it in a process of reciprocity. Think of an intimate relationship. You look at the other, and that gaze awakens behaviors, memories, affections. At the same time, what you see awakens new layers of perception in you. The relationship is not static. It is a living field of mutual transformation. The observer effect in daily life works in this same way. What you observe changes, and this movement also changes the one who observes. This shift demands humility, because if before it seemed enough to train focus, now it is realized that focus is also trained by experience itself. It is a constant flow, an infinite exchange between inside and outside. Recognizing this opens space for a more conscious practice, to observe not only to shape, but also to be shaped creatively, choosing which experiences you wish to allow to transform you. And here arises a powerful revelation. By accepting this reciprocity, the act of observing becomes deeper than a simple exercise of attention. It becomes a rite of surrender. It is not only you choosing what solidifies, but also allowing life to write new patterns in you, new ways of seeing, new ways of existing. This is the true break in the pattern. To realize that the observer effect is not reduced to you create reality, but that reality also creates you continuously. The dance happens only because both are in motion. This perception undoes the myth of separation and invites us to live in a more conscious way, but also more open, less rigid, less controlling. And perhaps this is the point at which you, watching, may ask yourself, how has life already been shaping my gaze without me realizing it? What have I been reinforcing in myself simply by repeating certain observations every day? If this reflection touched you in some way, I want to propose something. Like this video so that this message can reach more people, and in the comments write the phrase, I choose to observe differently. This simple declaration can mark the beginning of a concrete change, not only in what you see but also in who you become from this new gaze. If the previous part revealed that the observer effect is not a unilateral movement, but a dance in which consciousness and reality mutually shape each other, perhaps we can understand this more deeply through a symbolic narrative. Because certain truths are not revealed only in rational arguments, but in stories that echo within us as archetypal mirrors. It is told that in an ancient village, an apprentice sought to understand how to transform his life. He went to the community's master and asked what the secret to changing destiny was. The master took him to a calm lake and asked him to observe its surface. The young man, anxious, replied that he saw nothing beyond the static reflection of his own image. The master smiled and threw a stone into the water. Waves spread, distorting the apprentice's image. "See," said the master, "the water does not only reflect, it responds. The reflection changes according to the movement that reaches it, and each wave, as it returns, also changes the way you see yourself." This parable reveals the essence of the observer effect: to look and to be looked at, to move and to be moved. The lake symbolizes reality, and the stone represents attention. With each gaze cast, invisible waves spread, modifying the scene. But these same waves return, reshaping the way the observer perceives himself. It is an unbreakable cycle of co-creation. If we think about modern life, we can see this lake at work all the time. A person who fixes on patterns of fear throws stones that make the waters vibrate densely, and the reflection returned reinforces that fearful gaze even more. Another who opens to the possibility of trust provokes different waves and receives back a reflection that strengthens her. This is not superficial mysticism, but a metaphor for a quantum principle. Consciousness alters the field, and the field returns to consciousness its own transformed image. This same dynamic appears in myths from different cultures. In many traditions, the hero not only faces external monsters, but discovers that these creatures also reveal hidden aspects of himself. To observe the dragon is not only to see it, but also to allow it to show forgotten parts of the soul. The observer effect, transposed into the mythical imagination, is this encounter. To look at the world is also to look inward, and the return never leaves us the same. When we understand this symbolism, responsibility becomes even more intense, because it is not just about creating a better reality by the mere power of focus, but about assuming that everything observed, pain, joy, challenges, or miracles, is also sculpting us. With each experience faced head-on, a new version of ourselves is generated. It is at this point that the practice takes on a transformative tone. To observe consciously is not to flee from what bothers, nor to lose oneself in positive fantasies. It is to be willing to cast the full gaze upon what exists, knowing that this gaze is a stone thrown into the lake. It will create waves, and they will inevitably return, altering not only the external scene, but also the intimate structure of the observer. The apprentice of the lake only understood the master's teaching when he realized that the reflection was not fixed. He understood that he could not completely control the waves, but he could choose the way he threw the stone. And that choice made all the difference in the way he saw himself reflected. In the same way, we do not control all events, but we can choose the quality of observation we deliver to the world. This quality, sooner or later, comes back to us. The observer effect, then, becomes more than a scientific theory or a philosophical idea. It becomes an existential principle, a key that runs from the innermost depths of the body to the universal narratives that have guided civilizations. What you observe transforms you, and what you allow yourself to be transformed by changes the way you observe again. It is in this cycle that life expands. And perhaps this is the deepest message of this part. Each gaze is a seed of destiny, and each return is proof that you never observe alone. Reality always responds. In the parable of the lake, the apprentice discovers that he cannot prevent the surface of the water from moving, but he can choose how to throw his stone. This same principle can be brought into daily practice. We do not control everything that comes to us, but we have the power to choose the quality of the gaze we offer. The observer effect in order to cease being only a concept, needs to be transformed into direct experience. A first step is to understand that observing is not just seeing with the eyes, but placing presence in what happens. There is a difference between letting your eyes pass distractedly over an event and truly allowing it to exist before you. The practice begins with this gesture, sustaining consciousness on something without trying to modify it immediately. For this, choose a moment in your day when you are alone. Sit in silence and direct your gaze toward a simple object. It may be a lit candle, a stone, a leaf. Allow yourself to notice not only the form, but the texture, the vibration, the quality that emanates from that object. Notice how, as you sustain attention, your own mind begins to change. Thoughts slow down, the body adjusts, the breath reorganizes. Here, the observer effect manifests in its most intimate form. In observing, you alter the object of observation in your perception, but at the same time, the object also modifies you. This practice, when repeated, teaches something essential. Focus is not only a mental tool, it is an energetic field. When you place yourself entirely into an observation, you transfer energy to what you contemplate. It is like turning on the spotlight on the stage we spoke of earlier. But the difference lies in feeling the return. What receives your attention also sends back an effect upon your consciousness. We can extend this exercise to life situations. When facing a conflict, instead of reacting automatically, sustain attention on what is happening. Observe not only the words, but the energy behind them. Notice how your own reaction begins to transform. By practicing this conscious gaze, you cease to be a hostage to impulse and become a co-author of the experience. The conflict ceases to be only something external to be fought and becomes a field of reciprocal transformation. Another way to bring the observer effect into daily life is with the practice of attention directed toward the breath. By placing focus on the simple act of inhaling and exhaling, we not only perceive life more intensely as it happens, but we also modify physiological patterns. The heart slows down, the mind reorganizes, and the body enters a state of balance. Here it becomes evident that observing is not a passive act. It is a powerful intervention in inner functioning itself. The secret lies in understanding that every practice of observation is also a practice of choice. You can choose to look at pain with resistance or with acceptance. You can choose to see in error only failure or an opportunity for reinvention. Each choice of observation opens a different reality. The exercise is not in denying what appears, but in perceiving how you are looking. With time, this posture becomes a skill. The observer ceases to be merely someone who records the world and becomes someone who interacts with it in a creative way. It is at this point that the observer effect ceases to be a distant theory and becomes a spiritual and psychological practice. Because to observe consciously is not only to interpret, it is to generate realities. One final contemplation that can enhance this technique is to ask yourself in the face of any situation, what am I reinforcing by observing this way? This question creates space for consciousness to perceive whether it is feeding fear, hope, courage, or resignation. It gives the power of choice back to the observer and prevents attention from being captured by automatic patterns. If applied with discipline, this practice becomes a vibrational exercise capable of reorganizing not only thoughts, but also vital energy. The external reality begins to respond in a different way, not because the world has changed by itself, but because the quality of the gaze that meets it is no longer the same. The observer effect then ceases to be only a fascinating idea and becomes a daily tool. It reminds us that each gaze is a wave cast into the lake of reality, and that each wave returns bringing with it a new version of the one who observes. It is in this cycle of going and returning that life can be consciously recreated, one moment at a time. If in practice the gaze reveals itself as a creative field, in conclusion, it is impossible not to perceive the depth of this mystery. The observer effect ceases to be only a riddle of physics and becomes a reminder that consciousness is not a passerby, but an active presence in the construction of the real. What you observe consistently is strengthened, and what you ignore dissolves. This is the silent rhythm that organizes your life without you noticing. But the essential shift is to understand that this dynamic is never one way. In looking at the world, you alter it, and at the same time, you are altered by it. Each experience returns not only external responses, but a new version of yourself. The observer effect in this sense is not only a theory, it is a dynamic mirror of the very human condition. To look is to create, but it is also to be created by what one looks at. Throughout this video, we have crossed from science to symbolism, from story to practice. And now perhaps the remaining question is, how do you wish to use this silent power that is already at work in your life? At each moment, your focus is a choice that resonates. Each gaze is a creative gesture that leaves marks in the invisible field of existence. If this message resonated with you, write in the comments the phrase, "I am part of what I observe," so I know that you walked until the end of this video. And if you wish to continue receiving content that unites science, spirituality, and consciousness in a profound way, subscribe to the channel and allow this dialogue to continue expanding.